Hispanic or Latino influence is much greater in most of the nation than it is here in western Wisconsin, but gradually we are beginning to see some change here. This is Latinos in western Wisconsin. I'm Wayne Sorge. The food industry is one area where we are beginning to see some change, and the Ortega family is one of the smallest to bring about that change.
Ok, primero que nada vine por mi trabajo, pero a la vez pensando en hacer un negocio propio de nuestra propia familia. Empezamos a hacer comida mexicana porque vemos que hay gente hispana y a la vez gente americana que le está gustando nuestra comida.
First of all, he got a job here, then he always had this idea of starting a small business, a family business, and he saw that there was a market for something like this because there were both Mexican people and also American people that will like his food.
Claro que sí, la cultura mexicana le gusta a la gente americana y sobre todo pues parte de nuestra comida.
He said, yeah, everybody enjoys the culture because it's a multicultural society and a lot of people just like Mexican food.
Well, we've been like much of the rest of the country where we have some very serious, what you can think of them as labor shortages, or you can think of some demographic declines of certain sectors of society where we no longer like to work in, say, agriculture. And it may not be that necessarily that we don't like to, but our young people aren't going into agriculture. There's certain areas that of our service sector also that we look to other people, I think further down the socioeconomic ladder to fill some kinds of jobs that we don't aspire to as people from this region. And as you were saying earlier in a conversation, that we have a lot of people working in the background. Spanish speakers working in the background, in the hotel sector, in restaurants, in the back dish rooms, and so on. Now, one of the recent trends that we've seen to this area is in agriculture. We have a longer history of Spanish speakers coming to work as migrant laborers in Wisconsin, working in some of the seasonal industries, whether it's in the fruits or in some of the canning industries like beans and so on. What we've seen now is in western Wisconsin, we see in the dairy sector a greater number of people from other parts of the country who speak Spanish, people from California, people from Texas and elsewhere coming to work and fill in in the dairy sector those jobs that our young people from rural areas no longer aspire to. And that could be for a number of different reasons, whether they think that there's no future in this kind of work, or whether it's too difficult, or the numbers, those issues can be explored. But what we're having is increasingly in western Wisconsin, as much as maybe a third of the milk produced in this area then is produced by, well, ultimately by people who speak Spanish. Of course, the farms are still owned by people who have been in this area for a long, long time. But what we're seeing now is a newer wave of people in that sector. This then is in addition to the Spanish speakers who are working in, say, area meat packing plants, whether it's chicken or turkey or something like that. It's also in addition to some of the furniture production here, light industry kinds of things that we have in the area, as well as some of the tree plantations, say Christmas tree farms and this kind of thing. So we're having a growing number of Spanish speakers backfilling into those areas where we don't have sort of what homegrown workers and people working in them. And it's kind of awkward to talk about them as simply laborers or workers, because we're talking about real people who have aspirations every bit the same as yours or mine or my students or my children's or something like that.
Is the diversity greater than the image that people have?
Well, I suspect so, and that's changing. If you're thinking of Eau Claire, or you're thinking of, say, Buffalo and Trempealeau counties where I have looked. The Buffalo and Trempealeau counties and some of the other counties in western Wisconsin are some of the most homogeneous European counties in the country. I mean, some of the most homogeneous ones. Now, what's interesting is if you look at Wisconsin, say 120 years ago in the 1880s, Wisconsin had about 30% foreign-born in the entire state of Wisconsin. The United States at the time, had only about 15% foreign-born. as when you think of the population makeup. So Wisconsin had double the national average for foreign-born. In other words, we were a state, a region of foreigners in Wisconsin. Now we look at the numbers. Wisconsin is only about 4% foreign-born, whereas the country is about 11 or 12% foreign-born. So what that means is that over time, we've become a much more local, homegrown population, and really getting to be a much more homogeneous population. We don't have to look around us too much to realize that we're a pretty white region. We don't have what the Canadians might call visible minorities in great numbers, the kind of thing that you would have if you go to the Southwest or to California or to New York or something like that. But this is changing. We have local restaurants, businesses, grocery stores, shops, and then other related ones. Some local businesses in the computer business and so on that are catering increasingly to Hispanics, Latinos, Spanish speakers, people of color from the Spanish part of the Americas.
Many times people don't even notice that there are more than what comes to the eye, because lots of people are professionals and they just live like everybody else. They don't look that different from anybody else. So there are more than what people believe there are. And these people come, the ones that are able to move in and be not noticeable, are the professionals. Now we have also a big group of immigrant or migrant workers coming also up to western Wisconsin, and those people may be more noticeable because they are from the more challenging classes where they are poor, looking for agricultural work or work in factories, be it meat packing or places like in building furniture. They're in dairies, in different areas. And I think that this is going to be a trend that is going to continue. It's not just a passing trend.
And many of these people are not here just temporarily, but here to stay, aren't they?
Oh yes, especially the professional class, unless they have a job offer elsewhere. Most of these people will be here to put down roots, stay here. And even the migrant workers, sometimes if they are given a job, offered a job where they can see some stability to stay here in Wisconsin because they are being employed year after year, and they may also eventually settle in.
If business goes well, then that's the plan, to stay because he likes it here.
Are you doing well enough to support the family out of this business?
Que sin este business, que si te diera para soportar a la familia.
Pues estamos empezando apenas, pero hasta ahorita por el momento se ve que nuestro negocio está prosperando.
He said we're just starting, but it seems to prosper, so it seems that in the future that could happen.
Pues la vida en Wisconsin está muy bonita, sobre todo por la gente es muy linda y pues nuestro trabajo es por eso también.
He said life is pretty easygoing. The people are nice, and like there's no like violence or anything like that like in other places, so it's pretty easygoing.
Tell us about your origins, where you came from, and how it compares to here.
Que tus orígenes, de dónde veniste y cómo se compara aquí.
Ok, yo vengo del estado de Veracruz, en México, y pues la cultura allá es muy diferente aquí, totalmente diferente, pero aquí está muy bonito a la vez.
He said he came from a state called Veracruz in Mexico. He said life's totally different over there, but yet he's also liking it here in the United States. He's been here for a while now. From Mexico, and my dad moved to the U.S. to get a better job, and then after he was here for a couple years by himself, and then after a while he's like, well, I think it would be better if everyone moves here, so we moved like 11 years ago. I was 11, my brother was 5, and then from there we moved to Chicago. We lived there for 6 years, and then we moved. My dad got a better job in Eau Claire, so we moved to Eau Claire. We've been here for the past 6 years, and then after a while, we start thinking about business. What can we do? Like something new to town, something different, and we came up with the idea of a mobile restaurant to offer Mexican food, original Mexican food.
How do you think your food here compares to other Mexican food people go out and eat?
Well, all the food that they go in town is good, but what we try to do, some way that we try to differentiate from all the other restaurants is like original Mexican food, like everything fresh, everything handmade, everything fresh every day. We don't like put stuff on the fridge. Every day we go buy whatever we need daily on a daily basis, so everything is fresh.
What's been the response by the customers?
Well, it's been good. Like mostly we cater for both, for Mexicans and Americans, but our main customers are the Mexican community, because most of the people that live here are like single and guys, so they don't get to eat homemade food that often, so that's what our main target. And now we also moving to the American community because they like diversity too, and we seem that we try to diversify now into like doing catering services for parties, graduations, and all that kind of stuff.
Is your food some of what they miss about home?
Yes, I think that's the main reason why they come here, to get a taste of Mexico again. Because, like I said before, we live in America, so there's not a lot of... The cuisine is completely different from the Mexican cuisine, so that's why the main part they come to us.
They have a lot to offer the community as well as the workplace, the state. They are contributing a lot and giving diversity to the state, but they're also giving of their skills, of all that they have to offer, their knowledge to the community. So it's, if the person likes it here and or feel welcome, then they're going to stay. But it's not only those people that are going to be the people that come that are going to be the ones that will be gaining, but it's the whole community who is going to be enriched by their presence as well.
Well, I was born in Mexico City, which is the largest city, one of the largest in the world. In fact, this has around 22 to 25 million population around. I was born 42 years ago. I moved to Guadalajara when I was probably 4 years old. So Guadalajara is the second largest city in Mexico. Right now it's approximately has probably 6-7 million population. And I met my husband there because my husband's mom was from Guadalajara. She came to study to Wisconsin, and that's the way she met my husband's dad. They got married, they moved here, and then my husband will go often to Mexico. And when he went one of those times, I got him. Then we lived down there 3 years, and we wanted a nice place for our kids to be raised. And we decided to come back to Independence. That's where we live. We have 4 kids, and we've lived here probably 12 years.
But you operate this business here in Eau Claire, and you more or less are able to bring a piece of your home culture, your home heritage, to this business and share it with people in Wisconsin, aren't you?
I love what I do. Of course, I opened this business probably 10 years ago, and I just decided to open it because my husband, well, when we moved here, people used to love the way I would decorate my house or the jewelry that I would wear. So that gave me a good idea that I could do, that I could bring that stuff here. And at the beginning it was hard because people were used to perfection. Little by little I've proved that not everything's perfect, and people appreciate now the character in each piece because every piece that I carry is made by hand.
You're talking about the imperfections that make art, aren't you?
Exactly. I just purchase things directly with artists and artisans down there. Even sometimes I custom made certain things because I go right to them. Sometimes they let me. Sometimes they say, well, this is the way I do it, and this is the way, if you want to purchase it, it's fine. And I love it because I kind of introduce my culture this way. I can tell you stories about every single item I carry in the store.
But when you moved here, there was a lot less of the Latino or Hispanic culture in Eau Claire and the surrounding area than there is now, wasn't there?
Oh yes, I remember it was really hard to find someone that will speak Spanish. In fact, from Chippewa County, they would call me and to do certain translations to help them with sometimes cases that they had, and it was once every 6 months probably. But lately, I mean, I don't do that no more, but when I stopped doing it, it was almost every day that I had to be there.
How have you adapted to life in western Wisconsin?
I adapted really good. I think I'm lucky. Also, my personality helps me. I'm a pretty open person. I like to talk to people. I like to learn about things and cultures and people too. So I was lucky too because my husband grew here and he had a lot of friends, and all his friends always opened their arms to me when I came.
We have about 100, give or take, Latino students on campus, and what it's telling us that there's a growing community of Latino folks in this part of Wisconsin. Not necessarily people are coming into the area just to work on the farms. That's the first thing we think about. They're actually coming here to get an education, and we're fortunate enough to have Latino students on campus diversifying the campus and sharing their culture with us.
Now, when people think of Hispanics and Latinos coming into areas in the Midwest, they think of farm workers and construction workers and some who work in manufacturing, but they don't normally think of people who bring their hopes and dreams to higher education and to possibilities beyond those initial stereotypes.
Absolutely, and enter the Office of Multicultural Affairs. Again, we go beyond these stereotypes, and it's such a pleasure to see these students with all these hopes and dreams, the parents, because we get to meet the families, and they come here with such pride and so much hope for their kids. And we take them in and we become their second family here on campus, and we make sure from the moment they come in to the moment they graduate, we make sure to follow them and assist them in any way we can. Again, it's a real pleasure to see Latinos aspiring to much more than their parents would have been able to achieve. And not to say that we're not extremely proud of our Latino population in western Wisconsin. That is in manufacturing and the population that is on the dairy farms, but we're taking it a step further here on campus.
What kinds of career goals and education goals do they come here with?
Well, they want to graduate. They want to be professionals. We have Latino students basically spread out all over campus. They want to be businessmen and women. They want to be physicians. They want to be teachers. They want to work in larger corporations. And we're here to make sure it happens.
How have they adapted to Wisconsin, assuming they came from other places originally?
Beautifully. The resiliency of the Latino, the ingenuity, the capability to adapt to new situations, and also to bring their own culture and spread it here. People are very welcoming, and they have welcomed our Latino students with open arms. We have our Latino market. We have Latino events. I don't want to call it the Latinization of Eau Claire because we're not there just yet. We're hoping for it to eventually happen. But it's been a lovely process. Of course, we all encounter difficulties, including them. There are the stereotypes, there are certain expectations, and our Latino students have been able to show everybody, to prove to them how much they have to offer.
You yourself have a Latino heritage, but it's not typical of what stereotype people have of people from Mexico. You're from Venezuela, as I understand it.
Exactly. I'm from Venezuela, and my parents and grandparents are from European origin. So it would be, Venezuela or Europe via Venezuela, and that's why you see maybe different skin tone, different background. But again, I do consider myself very strongly Latina, and I connect with my students at that level.
I know you have a background in Puerto Rico, but seems the number one holiday for Hispanics and Latinos is Cinco de Mayo, which, as I understand it, is more of a holiday in parts of the United States than it is in some parts of Mexico. But is that a time for perhaps unity and celebrating the Hispanic culture?
Yes, it's interesting because many people believe that it's Mexico's Independence Day, which is not. It's when the French were beaten by the Mexicans in the town of Puebla. And this was in the 19th century. And but it's still, because so many people do enjoy the festivities during that time, all the lively music, the piñatas, the food, and all. Latinos come together, and the majority culture people come together also for celebration. So that does unify, as you just said, which is wonderful. It doesn't matter what it is.
Listen, a party is a party. Latinos love to have a good time. And if it's one more way for Latinos to express their identity and their culture and to share it with the rest of the world, why not? I would love for UW-Eau Claire to be a magnet for the growing Latino population in surrounding areas, and let them know that we have a home base here in multicultural affairs. And to let them know to come to us, to ask us, and we will do our very best for this to continue to grow.
I actually grew up in a town called Menominee. It's about a half hour away from here. And I grew up in a town where there wasn't a lot of Latinos. I remember growing up, and the only time I really saw Latinos is when we visited the St. Paul and Minneapolis area. So, but as of right now, there's actually more Latinos. There's a restaurant actually called El Patio in Menominee, and that actually brought an attraction of a lot of Latino people, and the population has risen definitely in the past decade.
Of course, most of the Latinos or Hispanics who move into this area are from a Mexican heritage, and you are somewhat different from a Chilean heritage, aren't you?
Yeah, my family on my mother's side is from Chile. Actually, the capital city is called Santiago, and that's where my traditional background is from, and that's what I'm familiar with. But yes, there are a lot of people that come from Mexico and the Central American region. That's where the majority of the immigration comes for Hispanic people.
Yeah, my parents came from Colima in Michoacan in Mexico, and they moved to California when they first immigrated in an area called Bell Gardens near Long Beach. And it was a pretty big Hispanic population there, and due to reasons like my dad was trying to find a job, and we had an uncle that lived in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. So he decided to move the whole family to Rice Lake, Wisconsin, and from then on, I think I was about 7 when I moved here, and that's where I've lived the last years of my life, I guess.
And growing up in Rice Lake, were there many from a Hispanic or Latino background in that area?
No, I think that when we first moved there, we were probably like one of the first families besides my uncle that lived there. In recent years, there's been quite a few of families that have moved there, but when we first moved there wasn't really anybody that spoke Spanish there.
Are there opportunities for more people from the Latino background to live in this area now than there maybe were in the past?
Yeah, I think there's more opportunities, there's more help, and I think the community has become a little bit more accepting. It's still very difficult because we form such a small percentage of the population.
I was born in Bellflower, California, which is in LA County. Lived there until 9, and we moved to Fullerton, which is in North Orange County, right next to Anaheim, where Disneyland is at. So went to high school there. Really nice mix of Hispanic, white, Asian. I went to a really diverse school, which is a rarity in Orange County. I mean, you have a lot of, white people or Asian people or Hispanic high school. So that was nice. And then in high school, got very involved with a lot of different activities, soccer, cross country, track. Did that. And I found another activity that I hadn't tried, and it was speech and debate. And I was very well at it, competed really well. Went to a debate camp at Stanford for a month, and just really became immersed. And I just wanted to continue it in college. So I made it apparent to my coach that I wanted to continue to do that, and he recommended Eau Claire, and I wanted a small school. I just wanted to see what was out there.
So what attracted you to come all the way from California to Eau Claire, Wisconsin?
Well, I want to say initially it was just the forensics team. I didn't even know where Wisconsin was on the map. I knew nothing about it. It was just a different environment. I think I just wanted to see something new and see what was out there.
I think some things that I find are important to me are a great sense of strength in my family. I have a deep connection with my mom because of the heritage and just physically my ethnicity and the way that I look, and I find that I have a greater connection towards my mother and that side of the family, especially with my brother as well. And my dad really supports the fact that I have a great how do I want to say it? A great passion for my heritage on my mother's side. And so family dynamic is very important to me, as well as learning more about myself and my culture. I love learning how to cook the traditional foods. I love learning more about the music. The traditional dance and music in Chile is called La Cueca, and I've been wanting to learn the dance forever. My mom has been trying to teach me, but it's a little difficult. And also learning different aspects about other Hispanic cultures as well, I think is very important.
Is there encouragement here on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire for that type of thing?
Definitely. I would definitely say so. The Multicultural Office is a great strength to all the students to enforce participation and kind of having an area of sanctuary for some people of different ethnicities. They promote the Hmong Student Association, the Native American Student Association, and definitely the Latino Student Organization as well. And they give us a lot of support to do the activities we want to do as to promote our different ethnicities and to try different things.
Do you think it's important for you? I mean, having been born in the United States, it's easy to just get absorbed in Americana, isn't it?
Definitely. But I like to try new things and learn about different cultures, not just my own, but about the Hmong culture, the Native American culture. And I think it's important to realize that, America is a melting pot, and we don't all have, different cultures and traditions. And I personally hold my culture and my tradition very close to my heart, as well as many other people.
It's kind of hard because when you go to school, you're trying to fit in, and you're just an American, I guess, and speaking English, and all of the background, all of the things you do at home are just kind of gone when you're at school. But when you go home, you speak Spanish because that's what my family wants us to speak when we're at home, and we eat Mexican food and things like that, and it's just kind of difficult to blend the two sometimes. With friends and things like that, it was always kind of interesting because you could never really talk to them about the same music or TV shows or things like that because they didn't understand. They grew up learning things in English. So back home, the white population is there,
but it's a little less than what I'm usually around. So it was definitely a change. It was a shock at first because all my life I grew up a certain way, having a certain way I spoke, certain way I acted. And to come here and act the way I did the same way, it was very shocking to some people, you know, just the mannerisms and such. So it was nice because I really learned to adapt and to change for the needs of the people here. And I find that the culture here, it's different, but I like it because they're both extremes. There's back home where it's just a lavish, luxurious lifestyle centered around money and just keep going and competition. Whereas here, it's a lot more, I want to say lax, but at the same time, people really work hard. They're not given money from their fathers, and they really know the value of money and hard work ethic, which I found really good to develop my own work ethic. So
I would like, mostly I would just like people around the area to be a little bit more accepting. I know that there's still a little bit of racism around, especially like in Rice Lake versus Eau Claire, and I hope that as more people move and immigrate here, that'll kind of it'll kind of diminish by seeing what people can do and seeing that not everybody fits the stereotype. So.
Now, my father was born in El Salvador, which is Central America, and my mother was born in Mexico, but she came here when she was like 12 years old, so she's pretty much been raised here. I want to say that, well, my dad was an only child, and he didn't have a father, so it was just pretty much him and my grandmother and her like 6 or 7 brothers. So all of the family was pretty much off of my grandma's brothers and sisters. So my dad didn't have any brothers, so I didn't have any uncles or aunts. So that really made our family really small. So a lot of other Hispanic cultures, they really have big fiestas and big parties and big quinceañeras, and we didn't really have that, just because our family was so much smaller. And then my mom, she had, I don't know how many brothers and sisters, many, but it was a lot more, no, I don't want to say detached, but less, bonds there. So I think she has like a brother in Tennessee and one in I don't know, like by Tijuana. So my family was really small compared to other Hispanic families.
When I first thought about coming here, I met with the multicultural department, and they were really accepting, and it's actually really fun being around a population that's higher in Hispanics than where I came from, and it might seem different from people that come from Milwaukee or something like that, but for me there's more Hispanics around here, so it's nice to be able to go to a store like the Sandoval and buy food that and things like that.
What is your goal in life?
Right now, my goal in life is to become a doctor because I want to help the Hispanic community. When I grew up, I did a lot of interpreting for my family and for friends, from Spanish to English and English to Spanish in hospitals, in clinics and things like that, because there wasn't really that many interpreters around the area. And I grew really interested in the medical field, so that's what I'm going to do so I can be a bilingual doctor.
Do you find that the Latino communities in Wisconsin have a difficulty in finding enough medical care?
Yeah, I do. I find that they're not only finding troubles like sometimes financial difficulties, but also finding people to interpret for them and a lot of things like that. They're not informed a lot of times about health risks and things like that, and it kind of hurts the Hispanic community not to be informed about those things.
Now, how they get here is all manner of getting here. People have historically come directly here. People have come here through California. People have come here through Texas. And then we get accustomed to the Spanish speakers as being newcomers, and then regularly you'll meet somebody who's been in Wisconsin really for quite a while. So there's different routes and patterns and pathways that people take to get to here in Eau Claire. And it's part of that sort of age-old sort of migration story, which is a combination of pull and push factors. Pull and push factors. You know, you leave a place for certain reasons and you're attracted to other places for other reasons, and these things work together, and we end up with people here in Eau Claire that that speak languages that we haven't historically had in this area.
I came first when I was 7 years old, and then when I was in high school, my family returned to Puerto Rico, and I did high school there and my BA. I returned to the U.S. for my graduate work. I got married, had a family, and my career here, and so I've been here for many, many years.
Are there things you still miss, though, about Puerto Rico or about Latino culture?
Well, let me tell you, I feel that I'm one of those very fortunate people that feel I'm bilingual and bicultural. So I feel very much at home in this culture, in this place, with the language, as well as I am in the Spanish language and Spanish cultures. And I do miss Puerto Rico and my family that lives there, my friends, but I do visit. I am fortunate enough that I can go and visit most years. And I go when it's cold, when it's coldest here in January for a week. So my husband and I travel there, and that just renovates the culture and the language. Even though he is not from there, he loves going there as well. So it's, yes, I miss it, but it's not that I can't have it as well. So in this case, I do have my cake and eat it too.
What would you say to people who look at the influx, especially of construction workers, agricultural workers, and people who are migrants, and fear that it's going to have a negative effect on the area where they live, here western Wisconsin?
Well, I can understand that some people feel that these people that are coming in are taking their jobs, and when the economy is in such bad shape as it is right now, these fears grow. But they have to remember that if these people are coming up and are taking jobs, it's because they have been asked to come up and because nobody else is taking those jobs. I would say, ask the people that are hiring, why are you hiring other people and not the ones that are from the area? And probably the employer will say, well, I have put out ads and nobody seems to want to answer those ads. So you need to know why foreigners, why immigrants come in. And sometimes you think that they are taking away, but in itself it's not that necessarily that way. It can be that to see it positively as a way of enriching the community by bringing in new things that can make the whole environment different, yes, and we don't like to have big changes, I understand that. But change does not necessarily mean bad. It can mean good. And we need to be open to new ideas, new ways of life. That doesn't mean that our way of life is bad or should be changed. It's just to see how other people live and that we can live in harmony if we understand and don't have these prejudices and biases.
There are, just as you say, many more in the area than one would guess by just looking down the street. And that's because people who are oftentimes sort of on the edges of society are also in the backgrounds of society. We don't see them as often. One of my anecdotal stories is I had a student who said he was struggling with Spanish. And I said, well, why don't you find a native Spanish speaker around in the area and speak to them? And he goes, well, there are none around here. I said, well, you know what? I tell you what, pick any restaurant and go and ask and see who works in the dish room. And then he came back later and said, sure enough, at my workplace, I went and talked, went into the back room and spoke Spanish with people back there. So you're exactly right. Is what meets the eye is not what's in fact taking place. And this has sort of some important implications. One is we don't realize the importance of the Spanish speakers' contribution to our lifestyles and activities in this area. And if you don't see them, it's really easy to take a lot of that for granted.
Is it going to mean some changes in western Wisconsin culture and entertainment and religion?
Well, with different waves of migration, it has always meant that in the past. When we think of our Norwegian grandparents that came to this area, our German grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on that came to this area, they hung on to the pieces of their cultures for a long time. We've had Norwegian and German language newspapers here in Eau Claire in western Wisconsin up until the Second World War, and those were by waves of migrants that began coming in the latter part of the 19th century. So they hung on to their native language newspapers for many, many decades. And you look around us now, we see remnants of that. But it's not, few people are speaking Norwegian. Some people wish they were speaking Norwegian still. We have Sons of Norway clubs and these kinds of things here. People sort of like to hang on to their cultures and the backgrounds. They like it when other people are sharing parts of that culture. Now we look around us here, what do we see? We have here in Eau Claire, how many Mexican restaurants can we count, and not including the fast food, franchise kinds of places. We have some independent kinds of Mexican restaurants, and so that is making a contribution to the local culture. Now, here's another issue that really needs to be considered, is that the state of Wisconsin is struggling with hanging on to its young people. After people graduate from high school, after people graduate from Wisconsin's universities, we are looking for ways, all the way up to the governor's office, we're looking for ways of hanging on to our young people. It's unsustainable when we start losing these, in a little bit like the plains and prairie counties in the United States are losing. They have a demographic problem. They're losing young people. Those are young people that they need to stick around to help be, the next generation of leaders, of business people, of teachers, of community and civic participants. Wisconsin has a little bit of that trouble in its rural areas as well, is we're losing young people who go to the big city, who go to Minneapolis, Chicago, the east or west coast, this kind of thing. What we're finding out is that we are increasingly reliant on migrants, any migrants, to backfill that population growth that's not taking place. And many states in the United States are competing for those very migrants. Iowa, for example, has now for a decade or more been really pushing to attract migrants through various kinds of means. And they're not being picky about the migrants, just as any place shouldn't be picky about the migrants. So they speak a different language, they bring a different spice with them, this kind of thing. Those migrants are needed for backfilling the loss or the sort of non-generation of young people that's coming up. We'll lose schools, we'll lose tax base. If our populations decline relative to the southwestern part of the United States, we're going to lose congressional power. If we because already the upper Midwest, the northeastern part of the United States continues to lose congressional seats in contrast to the southern and southwestern part of the United States. As we lose congressional influence, we lose control over those kinds of things that are important to us up here in the upper Midwest. So I'm not talking about competing, by having lots of kids just to be able to compete for that reason. But there are implications in not having sort of a healthy, sort of just consistent, sustainable population.
So the influx of a new population of a Hispanic Latino background would not be what some might fear to be an economic drain on the current culture here.
Study after study after study shows, and the most recent one I saw just came out, I think I read about it in a Green Bay or the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel or something, they looked at Green Bay, and they looked at the growing number of Hispanics in Green Bay, and they said, whatever short-term costs there might be, the long-term benefits greatly outweigh them. And most studies that I've seen, well, maybe all the studies I can think of, have shown that the net contribution to economic productivity, economic livelihoods, and not to mention diversity and keeping schools viable, the net contribution is way ahead of their net cost. And what would those costs be, or the perceived costs? They could be to the social services. They would be to the schools, to the hospitals and healthcare and so on. But they're not making big demands on those. The other thing about the Hispanic population, and really we can talk about them as a workforce because they're working in mostly manual labor, is that by all accounts from, say, these farmers, these dairy farmers and others who employ them, say they work with the same work ethic that our great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers who first came to this area. They work with that same work ethic. They work very hard and very consistently. They're making a very important contribution. Now, if you talk to agriculturalists across the country, they are having a very serious labor problem. Who is going to pick tomatoes? Who's going to weed vegetables? Who's going to milk cows? And my argument, or my suspicion anyway, is that we have a number of things that are very important to us culturally here in western Wisconsin, not the least of which is our landscape and our milk and dairy kind of production. If our dairy farmers don't have the labor they need to be able to produce milk, we start having a very significant problem in something that's very dear to us. The production of milk, which turns into cheese, which turns into, symbols on our license plates and on our quarters and this kind of thing. So we need some kind of help in producing our milk and cheese. And that right now we have found, thankfully, in the form of Spanish-speaking workers. And we can look at every migrant group and every wave of migrants that comes through. There's a time of uncertainty, both on the part of the host community and the part of the migrants themselves. There are language issues that need to get sorted out. But then what happens with time? For example, we can think of the previous group in which we're still seeing some tensions and so on, but the net contribution, I think everybody would agree that what the Hmong have brought to Wisconsin and what the Hmong have brought to this area is immeasurable in terms of its diversity, in terms of its new insights and exposure to different things, their contributions to local economics, all these different kinds of things. And that's not to say that it's all been fun and games for the Hmong, because it has been difficult and continues to be difficult. And when there are instances and circumstances where there are uncertainties, misunderstandings can emerge. So we still have to work with the Hmong and local and host communities. But think of here in Eau Claire, what would our farmers market be like without the contribution of the Hmong and their farming and agricultural skills?
For many people, worship is a key element in life, and historically in this area there are some churches that used to worship in Norwegian, used to worship in German. Are we going to see Spanish become a language of worship in significant ways in western Wisconsin?
There might be some communities here where there are some Spanish-speaking services. In fact, I think down in Buffalo or Trempealeau County there may be some, I don't know if they're weekly services or not, but say on Saturday night Mass or something that there's some Spanish components. But in any large or significant way, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Not to the extent that we had entire congregations of German speakers or Norwegian speakers. I don't see that anytime soon. Now, and in some communities in Iowa, in other parts of the United States, have embraced a Spanish-speaking service. And even in some small rural communities, other ones have found it very threatening, and some churches have split over something like that. But I don't think our numbers right now, in maybe just one or two cases, but not in any widespread sense, our numbers right now don't lend themselves to suggesting that we're going to see large or significant churches. Now, what we might have are some of these smaller, say, storefront kinds of gatherings of Spanish speakers. And, I guess my response to that is, if we're thinking of the Christian, say the Lutherans, the Catholics, and so on in this area, then everything, my understanding of Christianity and the Bible suggests that these would be welcome. The more worship, the more Christians, the better, at least from the perspective of other Christians. So to me, this is I don't see how this could be a negative thing. I could see it just a positive thing.
And you see positive reaction that you have to the overall influx of a more diverse population here?
Well, all evidence shows that those places across the United States that are more diverse are those places that end up being more economically successful. Diversity and the creativity and the color it brings contributes, in all cases I can think of, positively to the economic and other measures we would use for a successful, vibrant community. They're a sign of growth. When we stop having migrants come to this area, then we know we're in trouble, because we won't have that growth that we like. It's a good sign for what's going on in our community. Now, what we need to do is recognize this and help manage it, help direct it in ways we want, so that our communities aren't riven in two like some other communities in the United States have been, when some of these arguments or misunderstandings or discussions then just spiral out of control. And I think we've made a very good start toward that here in western Wisconsin and in the whole state.
Okay, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you think needs to be addressed?
I think the more we can talk about migration and Wisconsin's needs, the better. And this is one example of something like that. The United States right now cannot come up with a migration policy. Simply building a tall barrier at the border is not a migration policy. That's just building a fence. It doesn't solve any of the issues between neighbors to build a fence between those. In fact, we like to think of ourselves just the opposite kind of people, as people who build relationships, not build up walls in relationships. Now, what I would like Wisconsin to do is work towards a migration policy that is in its own interest. Start setting this up, because when the politicians finally, maybe after this next election cycle, when the politicians actually start working toward a national migration policy, Wisconsin's needs and Wisconsin's interests are going to be very low on the list of things that they're going to consider. They're going to consider what's important to California, to Texas, to Florida, to New York. These big states with big congressional delegations are going to have they're sort of going to run the show. So I'd like Wisconsin, despite that, I'd like Wisconsin to become known as a state that has a very sort of dynamic, creative, and meaningful approach to migration on its own. So that whatever the country does, we're known as people who have approached this well. And there's some examples around us that we can use.
Can you give us a specific explanation of how we do that?
Well, I think exactly this is to increase awareness, to increase educational programs, to show care for the migrants, know the role that migrants play, to not take advantage of them, but to incorporate them into the kinds of things that we think are very important, to not necessarily turn migrants into, say, oh, it's okay if we have migrants if they do everything the exact same way that I do them. That's not a migration policy. What we need to do is work with the migrants and then work with the host communities. What are the things that the host communities are afraid of? What are those kinds of things that we can then work on? One of the things they're afraid of, and we hear this all the time, is saying, migrants going to take away our jobs. Well, all evidence shows that new migrants, even with low education levels, they don't take away other people's jobs. The only people they really compete with are those people that have no education themselves, that are high school dropouts. Those are the ones they compete with. Well, if we have a significant population of high school dropouts, then our problem is not a migration problem. Our problem is an education problem. And that's the issue that we then have to spend time working on, is how those people that feel that their livelihoods are threatened by new migrants, we need to work with those people who feel threatened to increase their levels of education and their ability to contribute meaningfully to the local economy, the local communities.
Do you think we have that kind of a problem with a large number of high school dropouts or other people who are not prepared to compete for their jobs?
No, not really. I mean, because when I talk to the dairy farmers and about them trying to get people who are willing to work hard on the dairy farms, is they essentially get no applicants for their jobs. And they pay actually, quite well when we think of the kinds of pay people are often stuck with. Now, in some very localized areas, we may have some of these, but I think these would tend to be in some of the bigger urban areas, Milwaukee or something like that. I'm just guessing. I don't know for sure.
You've talked about the growth in the Latino Hispanic population over the past 10 years. What would you expect to happen over the next 10 years?
Well, national numbers, when we look at the numbers projected by the Bureau of the Census, we just see sort of continued rise in the number of Spanish speakers in the United States. And then over the next few decades, almost half of our population are going to be visible minorities. Many California politicians have already realized that the growth in the number of sort of Hispanics and Latinos, and whether it's through migration or whether it's through birth rates, the growth is so significant that they're consciously starting to court Hispanic voters, because they know that in a few years that's going to be the majority of many of those districts. And what I see is, if Wisconsin then becomes a welcoming state, I think we will see more people come to this area. But that is something we need, because without migrants, our population growth rates are so low that we will not have the capacity for thoroughly developing, keeping our schools alive, for developing communities. I think the numbers will grow, and I'm looking forward to a healthy migration policy. I mean, we can't pretend that this country is going to be a country that lets everybody who wants to walk in, but to have a policy that is meaningful for us, that is meaningful for our neighbors. I think we have a special relationship with Canada and Mexico, so that I don't think it's appropriate that we treat them as if they were just any other country on earth. They're our next door neighbors. We have shared land with them at different points in our history, so we need to work with them on programs that are meaningful in terms of how we negotiate our borders with each of those countries.
Tell us how a place like Eau Claire and the surrounding area is going to change, or is changing already, because of this change in the population.
Well, you just have to look at the restaurants in the area. So many people tell me that they love Mexican food. When would I ever thought that here in Eau Claire there would be such a wanting to eat at Mexican restaurants? That's one area. And if you look at or listen to some music stations, they have some Latin beat in their music. If you look at what is being presented at like the State Fair, the Heidi Center for the Arts here at UWEC, there are quite a few Latin American programs that the community in general seem to enjoy and support.
Latinos or Hispanics are finding new opportunities for education and careers here in western Wisconsin, but they're also bringing new cultural experiences and friendship for those who already live here. This has been Latinos in western Wisconsin. I'm Wayne Sorge.